Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the search for awakening, who we are as spiritually evolving people. And my journey has been around the world to discover people who are waking up to their true potential, and that has taken me to the backwoods of Maine with my good friend Seth Pruzansky. This is his new book, The Flight to Enlight. Initiation through the heart is the only way to win. Seth, thanks for all the hard work you have put into making this something epic and something that has your heart, something that soul, really. You put something of your life's journey, and it hasn't been a picnic. It hasn't been easy, but you come out the other side and talk a little bit about first the journey and then where you are now in this awakening, because you've had an awakening that can help other people. That's what's so important.
Yes.
So, yeah.
If I can do it, everybody can do it, because it's actually really simple. That it's a simple process that enabled me to live through things that most people don't live through. So I'll just condense this. And if there's points that you want me to go deep into, let's do that. But for the sake of tying it all together. So I was born in a perfect environment in my early childhood. I lived deep in the woods of Maine. I was living off the land. I had so much love and support from my family who just let me do whatever I want. This enabled me to exist in a state of being that where my natural inclination was to be in nature and just observe nature. I would literally sit down and just observe nature. And because it felt so good to my being that I would just continuously naturally do that. But as I would stare at the tree line where the trees met the sky, and everything would get brighter and brighter and brighter until I couldn't see even the world around me anymore. All there was an electromagnetic energy field that was with my heartbeat pulsing through it. And it was so normal and natural and easy to get into, and it felt so good that I would constantly do this as a young child. But I didn't know that it was anything big. There was no words for it. I had no way to articulate it. It wasn't like, oh, this is a state of heart-brain coherence, or this is a state of being holistic so that you can identify with your greater source. None of that. I had no actual way to identify with it as anything other than this just felt amazing. It was great. So I would do that constantly. And in that state, I just became aware of simple but profound universal truths that we all are aware of at some part of ourselves. But as I
Wait, I just want to ask you about that, because as you grew up into the world, things got harder and harder. But when you're talking here, it's just like I get the sense that you had that foundation that sort of kept you safe and whole. It was sort of encoded. I'm just putting this together now. And you had that sort of angelic sense of self that kept you alive through this awful journey of very difficult circumstances. Would you say that's did you
I would.
you
I
put
would.
that together?
I would. I absolutely would say that. But I don't want the viewers, I don't want people who are going through their own challenges who might not have had the remembrance of this connection that I had as a child to think that they don't have the ability to have that now or connect to it, because it's always there. It's available to all of us. And it's just really about understanding a few fundamentals that can allow us to connect to it.
So you had this idyllic experience as a child, but then you got sort of like the story of Buddha, almost like Buddha grew up inside a castle in a kingdom, and then it's like suddenly he kind of thrown into the world and said, oh my God, there's awful things happening. But you weren't just the observer of these awful things, you were the recipient of these awful. I mean, you go through it. It's actually painful to read this book at times, because I'm feeling so much of what you're feeling. It is uncomfortable, but if he could go through it, we can go through it as a reader and also be better for it. So talk a little bit about the hardships and the sinking from that high level down to these deeper levels.
So just to be clear too, the book is written in a way that put on there just a second.
Yeah.
The book is written in a way that yes, it is very painful. I went through dark things that normally would kill most people, but I was able to come out of it because of the recognition that I am not who I think I am. I am not these terrible situations that are happening to me, and I'm not the victim of them unless I allow myself to be. And so I went through something that is now enabling others to be aware of this part of themselves. Because essentially, what the world is going through now with COVID and everything that's happening, I went through almost the same things personally before all of this happened.
But that's the point I want to get to.
Yeah.
You know, you were put in jail, you were turned in by a friend, you were, an addict. I mean, all the things that people think are really horrible to go through, you've been through that and you felt like a victim of it. But what was that point of consciousness that turned it around?
So it takes a lot to disconnect, right? It takes a lot to build up a bunch of habits that
Yes.
get you stuck in a certain state of being.
Yes.
And so the journey out of it for me was long, and it took a while. You know, it ultimately concluded with going to prison. I spent 3 years in prison where, it was like all the trauma, all the pain, everything that I had been through all of the things that happened, and we'll touch on those things
Right.
in this. I had to face it all at once, but it was so much, and it was so burdensome, and it was so, like, almost ridiculous in a way. And that's the thing. It was like the weight of the world, it's like so heavy, and you're like, I just can't do it, I can't do it. But then something clicks on, and you're like, it's kind of a joke. Like, it's kind of silly.
That clicking on, I think, is really key to people watching. I always want to say Seth went to prison for something very minor, possessing marijuana.
Yeah.
And right now it would not be considered a crime, but in 2009, or was it 2006?
Yeah, 2009.
2009, it was a serious offense. So you went to a pretty intense prison, and you were suffering because you were, like you said, you were in a place you didn't want to be with people you didn't want to be with, and doing what you definitely
And I had at that point, a 10-year chronic illness too.
What was the illness?
It was a whole GI dysbiosis, all this stuff related to my gut, which I could hardly eat anything.
And so they don't serve you great food there. It wasn't organic, was it?
No.
No, but
I asked them, but they...
No. But how did you make... So you're really suffering in an environment that was not pleasant. How do you click on that? Most people wouldn't be able to do... What was it, because you had that grounding as a child? Or what clicked for you?
As I was saying, there was so much wrong, so many problems that I remember getting to a point and just being like, this is kind of ludicrous. It's kind of like a joke. And when I got into that state and recognized, like, wait a minute, what if this isn't as crazy and intense and dramatic as it appears to be on the surface? Mm-hmm. What if it is something else that is opposite of that or beyond that is causing all this to happen because it's trying to get my attention?
Wait, let me understand that. So you're saying you're suffering, you're in prison, it's an awful thing, and you said to yourself, what? Break that down a little bit. What did you say?
So I'm in prison, okay? Yeah. I have years and years of trauma that started with being bullied in school, becoming a severe heroin, cocaine, and crystal meth addict. That came with, getting into really a bunch of car accidents. I've had countless near-death experiences, both drug-induced and just from things like car accidents and other accidents and stuff like that. And so my life has been one super intense thing after another that I had never truly resolved or made peace with until I was incarcerated. And so I'm in prison. all this stuff from my entire life had built up, and I'm feeling it all and realizing that I have to deal with it all right there on the spot.
Wait, so you're saying that you didn't have a choice. You're left alone with yourself, which you also compare to the situation we've all been in for 6 or 8, 10 months, whatever it has been, and you had nothing else to do except look at your own experience.
Yeah.
And so, what did you do? How do you be with those deep pain? How do you turn around so you start say, okay, I'm going to look at this?
Yeah.
What do you do internally?
First thing I started doing was writing. Believe it or not, like that's what this book came out of. Is I was like, okay, I need to write out my life experience so that I can look for self-defeating patterns. And that was my initial instinct. That was the first thing that I did, and I immediately started seeing these patterns. And
What did you say specifically? If you want?
basically how I would make decisions that were very narrow, that were not in alignment with possibility. They were fear-based, stress-based decisions.
What decision? Give us a specific.
So, like just the way that I would interact with people in the world. Like when I first started going to school and being bullied, instead of being confident and being like trusting that this was something that could empower me, I was afraid. I felt like a victim. I made it worse than it already was.
But that is natural. You don't have to like beat up on yourself. That's a natural thing to do. You didn't do anything wrong there. I mean,
had I been like now, if something like that happened, I would handle it very differently, because when you are empowered by something, you're able to perceive them in a much different way, something that we're not taught as kids.
well, tell people how you turned that around. Be specifically how you went into this and made it okay. Went into the trauma and.
So in prison, essentially, this is what happened. So I'm not gay, and I spent 3 years in there, and I had a lot of sexual energy. I'm a very vigorous, like healthy, health-driven person, even though I had a health ailment at that time. I was like, what am I going to do with my sexual energy? And sorry not to be crude here, but I'm not going to jerk off in the shower. I'm not going to just try to like indulge in any kind of fantasies or whatever. I have to do something with it. And so my intuition was to breathe that energy up into my body. And I started doing this constantly. And as I would feel, because sexual energy feels incredible, that's why we love it. But when you use it as an internal mechanism instead of the external mechanism that most of us are used to using it as, it affects you, your consciousness, who you believe yourself to be in a much different way. And so I'm feeling the energy of this creative life force just, going into different parts of my organs. I would intentionally breathe it into, all different areas of my body and up through my spine and everywhere. And it took me a while to get it to go up into my brain. But when I finally made it go into my brain, I had what I can only describe as a braingasm, where it felt like the best orgasm I've ever had times infinity in my brain. And when that happened, everything changed. And I realized I could just see all the greater circumstances that led up to why I was incarcerated, and all of the pain and trauma, all the things of the past. Everything made perfect sense because it was all put there, you could say, to get me to become aware of something that I was not aware of and not taking responsibility for.
So that was a moment of awakening. That braingasm. When you had that, did the whole sense of victimization change? Your whole perspective changed?
Everything changed because the feeling of it. See, with the braingasm was one thing. Then I realized after that, because I had practiced so much doing this with the energy, I could feel that anywhere in my body. I could feel it in my heart. I could feel it in my throat. I could feel it in my stomach, which is what healed my condition.
Wow.
I could feel it anywhere. And just the feeling of that so supersedes anything I had ever felt before, that it didn't matter that I was in prison. It didn't matter that I was around people. All that mattered was this. And I realized that the life I had lived up until that point was trying to get me to realize this point, this 0 point, this place where this intervention happens between the person that we feel like we are and the actual energy that is animating the person that we believe we are.
So that was the moment of revelation. I'm glad we got there, because that's what I was trying to understand, because you had a very hard time growing up in school, and part of your consciousness did create that, you're saying, to finally awaken. But you needed the lessons, would you say? This was the most severe one, being locked away, and that was your final test in a way, right?
I wouldn't say final. I've had tests since.
Okay.
It keeps going. But what it enables you to do is, with each time you expand consciously and your heart opens more, you are endowed with the ability to face greater and greater initiations.
Wow. So you made peace with being there. You got out in 3 years instead of 5 years.
Yeah.
But then your real work is about awakening others. Well, talk about that. Talk about how you, because this is really what I want to tell people about Seth's work. He's here to help people through the issues and help awaken them to that potential that they are. So talk about how you do that with other people.
So we are a species that has ancestrally evolved with such a limited perception of self and this greater reality that a lot of us don't really know where to look. But it's by recognizing that first. Okay, you have, like, that was the first thing, is like, okay, I don't know what I don't know, but I know that there's something else there. And even though I don't know what it is and I can't put my finger on it, I'm going to make a choice that I'm just going to do whatever it takes, even if I don't know what that is, until I start to have a more clear picture of why I'm alive, of why this world appears to be the way it does. So the first thing is getting people to that place where they are just like, okay, I am going to choose to make this awakening or enlightenment, or whatever words you want to call it, a priority. Number one, nothing else matters more than this. And find it within themselves to be so willing to let go of every attachment, to be willing to give up everything in order to have this greater experience of self.
So talk to me, like let's say we're off camera, I'm coming to you, I'm saying, well, I'm confused, I don't know what to do with myself, I don't know where to turn. I mean, what would you say to me?
Yeah.
Like, what would you...
So, one,
Yeah.
how much do you want to change? Right? That's the first
Well,
thing.
let me think about that.
Yeah.
What will I be getting if I change?
Well, it's up to you, really, because you can have everything, you can get everything.
Are you sure?
Do you love the past more than you love the potential of your future?
Well, I know what the past was. I mean, the potential for the future, I think, I don't know, love, I could be open to a greater potential. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm open. And so what do I do with that openness?
So that's the first thing. It's like, if that openness is there, then you have to be the one to decide that even though you don't know what it is, you're willing to face the unknown, to face things that are putting you outside your comfort zone, and do it habitually until you start to see results.
Was that part of your practice? You kept being put outside your comfort zone, living in the
Constantly.
woods, being bullied, drug addiction. These were not comfortable things.
No.
So you got used to being outside your comfort zone, and you say, well, I could do it for those, so why not do it for something that really is important for my life?
Exactly. And you know what, like, the severities, the trials, the tribulations, the hardships that I went through, we don't have to go through this to awaken to what we're talking about here, suggesting.
So what do we do? Okay, let's say I want to change. Yes, I want something that's unknown, but I know will make me happy. Then what do I do?
So the first thing is you make that decision that you're going to
Okay.
find it or tune into it or attune to it. So one is you make that decision. Second, you decide that you have within you the ability to generate feelings of wellness, to create elevated states of being by your own choosing.
How do I know that? How do I do it?
So by practice. Okay, so the most crude example,
No,
but
let's do it.
it's such
That's
a
okay.
perfect example. I talk about it often. When you have a sexual fantasy about somebody, you imagine what it would be like to be with that person and have sex with them and to do whatever. And the very act of you considering what that might be like triggers a biological response. And we all know what happens. In men and women, our private parts get ready for sex in their own way.
Through our own mental creation.
Yes.
Right.
So our imagination, our mental construct, our vivid imagery and imagination triggers a physiological response in our body. We can do that same exact thing anywhere in our body where there's a plexus center, like your heart. So that might look like, oh my God, like what would it be like to just love my body and this life? And oh my God, like like you just literally create this imagination, almost like a fantasy, exactly the opposite of what the world tells us to do. Don't daydream, don't be. You create vivid imagery, a love of imagining what your life and potential could be. And in the same way that the energy goes into your private parts when you're thinking about having sex with somebody, that energy goes into your heart, and your heart enlarges and it activates and it starts producing feelings that are in alignment with what you are imagining and thinking and envisioning. And when you realize that your body has the ability to create feelings because you are choosing to do it, then you realize that there's a big piece of the empowerment puzzle that we hadn't learned about before.
Okay, so let me digest that. You're saying whatever I want, whatever dream I have, I sort of fantasize about it. I give it energy and source it through a kind of a feeling connection. So I want a beautiful house, which actually you've created. You've manifested so much great things as well. You have businesses. Also, this water we'll talk about in a little bit, tourmalines, springs. But so, and so I imagine that possibility, and then I feel it.
Yeah.
Totally
Yeah.
in my body as a bodily sensation. And then what? And you just wait? And then
So the feeling of it is such that it feels so good that you want to keep doing it. So instead of living the way you were before you started doing that, which is the past, you could say, it's identifying with the way things were, which wasn't quite working for you, which is why you made the decision to be open to changing yourself. And then you started realizing, wow, I'm very powerful in that I'm able to create feelings from within me that are by choice, that aren't necessary for some outer thing to do it. Then you're like, oh my God, it feels better than anything I've ever done prior to that, so you want to keep doing it.
Right. I also want to say Seth leads workshops and talks and retreats about this practice, this enlightenment. What do you call this practice?
I'm giving it different names, but it's essentially you're activating all of these dormant aspects of your own human perception by, causing your heart, causing all these glands, all these plexus centers, which have been programmed with your stress, your fight or flight, your all the stuff from the past that are keeping you in a really limited state of being. You're reprogramming them with your own feelings of expansion because the universe is expanding.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in the sense that we have stored old patterns, toxic patterns in each of these chakras. oh, your heart was broken, you closed that down. Oh, someone told you that you couldn't sing, so you stopped. Someone told you not to. So all these have thought form energies that have stopped us from truly energizing our potential. So this work that you're creating is to re-engage these centers with positive energy, also powered through that maybe sexual, not experience, but that bringing the energy up. So you're bringing the energy up the spine and you're activating all these places because we don't know the power we have in our bodies.
Exactly, and that's exactly it. But we can find out, and I am a living testament. I used to shoot 50 bags of heroin into my arms a day.
50 bags?
50 bags a day.
Wait, 50 not dollars?
50.
50 different bags?
Yeah. When I first started doing it, I would snort a quarter of a bag, a little tiny bag of it, and be high for like 12 hours.
Right.
And then before I know it, I'm shooting 50 of those a day with crystal meth, with cocaine.
Oh my God! How did you get out of that? How'd you get out of that?
This same kind of process, really.
Well, but how long was that happening for you?
3 years. I went
3
through
years.
that. It's funny.
And what made you decide that you didn't want to do that
I
anymore?
overdosed so many times that I was just like, I'm going to physically die if I keep doing this. And I wanted to live more than I wanted to die. So I made a really firm decision. Like I said, that's one of the first things is I made a decision that I'm going to live no matter what.
But why were you doing that in the first place? Why were you doing that?
This was like, we skipped a bunch. We
I
skipped
know,
out a
I
bunch of
know
stuff,
we
which is
did.
fine, doesn't matter. But
No.
I did it because this trauma had built up throughout my life from being bullied, from, getting into car accidents, just a lot of karmic stuff, I had family issues and stuff that really imprinted me in a way that caused blockages, right? Because like Alan was just saying, when we don't know how conscious we are, when we don't know how powerful we are, we still are working with power and energy. And when we're doing it from our lower survival centers and we're in a state of fight or flight or stress, then the way we interact with our own sexual organs or our second chakra, you call it, with food or with our power center, our solar plexus, is going to be from a stress-based place. And so we're constantly wiring levels of stress into our perception of reality that we come to accept as normal. So the thing then becomes like, how willing am I to get beyond this, to break out of it?
So that takes a lot of will to just walk away from something that was numbing you, and then from there, that was a lesson. That was an initiation.
Definitely.
But it didn't get you all the ways home till you went to prison,
Yeah.
and that was the final thing that says you don't want to live that way anymore.
I wouldn't say that because, again, there's different stages of this. There's different stages of our own personal evolutionary development that we go through, and these initiations just prepare us to be able to go through them more gracefully. I know it's not like everyone, like, we're all hoping there's a finish line here, right? Like, we go through some tough stuff, and then we come out of it, and it's great, but in my experience, it's been like, yeah, you get to that point, but it's like, all right, I'll make an analogy. Becoming awakened is one step, or enlightened is one step. Staying enlightened is countless steps that you're always taking to sustain.
But after staying enlightened, there's the third step, which you're doing, which is helping others. That's the service, the miracle of what happened to you. Talk about that now, because you got clean, you got clear, you got out of prison, but then when did you make that last step, decide to do this for others?
When I was in prison and I was in these highly coherent states, essentially, which means I've reactivated all the old trauma and drama and everything that had accumulated in my sense of self and reality, and I had transformed it into a coherent space, meaning that I syncopated all the organs of my body with the rhythmic beating of my heart from a place of calm, of trust and love, elevated emotions, then I noticed that my entire energy field just changed. I just felt at peace with reality, and I trusted everything as it was. And I noticed the effect that it had on others around me.
In the prison?
In the prison.
What effect did it have?
So the guys that were, when you're in prison too, like people, their ego, is just brought out to the extreme because nobody can hide. You can't hide who you are. You, in all of your everything, gets brought right to the surface, and you can't pretend. And these guys were, it's exactly what you would think prison is like. They're angry, they're aggressive, they're fighting, they're yelling, like all that stuff. And that's just kind of their normal state of being.
Right.
But these internal states that I was cultivating were so good. They felt so incredible. It was so enriching that I was like, I'm not coming out of this. Like, they could be fighting, and like none of it would trigger me to come out of it because it felt so incredible that I was like, yeah, right. Like, I'm not going out of that. But when I would sustain these states, these guys would be like, what is it? They literally like, what is it? Like,
Wait, they would feel that, and they would say, "What is what?"
I could see how they would make the transition from being like a wild animal, right? Like they're just this wild, like ready, to being suddenly almost like you could see innocence in their eyes. You could see peacefulness. They almost turned into like little kids before they had turned into hardened criminals. They were like children. They had their awe and their innocence back, and it was there, and they felt amazing. They felt something that they hadn't felt in a long time, and they were interested in it.
In your presence, they felt that, and that was a transformation for them.
And me.
And you to have that effect.
Yeah, because I realized that I was doing something internally that was having an external effect on people around me.
And that's when you saw that you could start doing this.
Yeah.
Well, what is that state? Are you in that state all the time? I mean,
No, but a lot of the time.
Can we get in that state now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
So, the entrance into this is just a simple state of heart-brain coherence, and it'll be easier for you to do it because usually I don't talk when I do it. But
okay.
So you exhale and you inhale rhythmically. So like say it's 4 counts in or out, 4 counts in, 4 counts out.
Okay.
And you just keep doing that. But here's the most important part of it, is that you're choosing to feel joy or an elevated emotion in your heart.
Okay.
And so as you're breathing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're doing it through your heart.
Oh.
Yeah, breathing through your heart, and you're feeling.
Oh, I feel that. Did you start to show people in prison this technique?
Yeah.
Oh, really? It does make me feel good.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel the joy starting to come.
And so what happens when you do this routinely and regularly and you practice it because you've made a commitment that being in this state is more important than not being in this state, then you eventually change everything in your body. Your wiring, your perception of what you think is important. All this stuff gets redirected because the longer you stay in these states and you practice being in them, the more incredible they feel, and the more the potential and possibility of who and what you actually are starts to emerge to the forefront of your awareness.
So that's heart-brain coherent. When I'm breathing and I'm expanding and I'm intending this expansion, and that expansion then takes over and I start to smile and feel the love, then we keep expanding.
Yeah. So the Heart Math Institute actually has a great app that you can get. There's like this little clip that you put on your ear, and it shows you on your phone, and it's just the basic heart rate variability. So you can see when you're not in a state of coherence, your heart rate is really jagged. But when you're in a state of coherence and you're breathing, your heart is like a sine wave. It beats like that. And the feeling of it when you see it in that range is just undeniable. You're not stressed out. You feel like this is what I've always known I'm capable of feeling like. And it brings you back to that childhood joy and innocence and wonder.
I love this. Could we like pick up part 2 in a little bit? Like, so this is what we're leaving you with. Try that. We're going to go back into the Fight to Enlight. And part 2, I'm here with Seth, Leaf, Pruzansky.
Pruzansky.
Sorry,
And we've known each other for 20 years.
I know.
So
I never knew. And in part 2, we're also going to talk about his discovery of Tourmaline Springs, your company, your raw food company. There's so much more to this story, but this was the start of this awakening that I wanted people to really understand what's possible.
Yes.
So thank you. Part 1 of Fight to Enlight. Thank you, Alan Steinfeld.
Thank you, Alan, for having me on
Hey,
your show. I
Seth.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
we'll continue later.
Okay.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was good. That was about. Yeah, let's do part because actually I found.